So I recently went through the kind of nightmare that makes you wonder if karma ever takes a vacation. My grandpa's arm wasn't broken in some freak fall or by the weight of his 84 stubborn years. No, it was snapped like a twig by men who claimed they were from the HOA. Men who thought rules gave them the right to play God on his front lawn. They called it a compliance check. But when I looked into his bruised face and the cast that swallowed his arm from knuckles to shoulder, I knew exactly what it was. A message, a warning, a threat wrapped in plaster. The call came at sunrise. I was 100 miles out riding hard, the Harley's engine chewing up desert blacktop. The phone buzzed in my pocket, caller ID flashing hospital. That word alone is enough to hollow a man out. The nurse's voice was professional, rehearsed, too calm. She said my grandpa was stable, that it was just a fall. But stability is only the breath before things get worse. And Art Jensen doesn't just fall. Not the man who walked away from a helicopter crash in the Myeong Delta back in '68. I turned the bike around in one brutal arc, rubber screaming against the asphalt, horns blaring behind me. I didn't care. 90 minutes later, I stormed through hospital doors reeking of gasoline and dust. There he was, my grandpa, smaller than I'd ever seen him, swallowed by hospital sheets, his face a map of purple and yellow bruises, a neat row of stitches above his brow, his left arm encased in a white tomb of plaster, his fingers swollen and blue at the tips. He looked at me and somehow managed a crooked smile. "Took you long enough," he rasped. I pulled a chair close, leather jacket creaking as I sat. "Looks like you've been busy." But inside, my gut was cold. I've seen accidents. I've seen war. This wasn't an accident. This was violence. Someone had held him while another snapped his arm. And when I asked, his voice came out flat, stripped of everything but fury. "Tell me what happened." He turned toward the window like it hurt too much to say. Finally, the words scraped out. "Just some trouble with the homeowners association." He said it like it was nothing, a broken fence, a leaky faucet. But then he sighed, his chest rattling. "It's this new president, Karen Tom. She's been pushing everyone out, raising fees, fining people for their mailbox colors, their lawns. She wants the land, the whole neighborhood, sold off. Yesterday, she sent a couple of her goons." I stared at the cast, at his bruises, at the weak but fiery look in his eyes. "And they did this?" He nodded. One held me. The other said it was a message. "We have 72 hours to sign the new agreements or worse." Something heavy settled inside me, a familiar weight, the quiet before the storm. I've lived long enough to know when violence has declared itself, and this was war. I stood, the chair scraped against linoleum. 72 hours, I repeated. He tried to stop me, his voice almost pleading. "Cal, don't. These people, they're not your fight. Let the police handle it." "The police," I scoffed. "I already called them, know what they said, civil matter, HOA dispute. Unless I had a confession or a video, it's my word against theirs. They're not coming, Art. No one is coming." I leaned in close so he could see in my eyes what I meant. "You know me, I don't start fights, but when someone puts their hands on my family, I finish it." I left him with that, his voice calling after me, "What are you going to do?" But I didn't answer. My hand was already on the doorframe. I knew exactly what I was going to do. She gave us 72 hours. I'd give her one back. And the first step was simple, make 2 calls. The first to my cousin Razor, president of the Iron Sentinels, a motorcycle club with steel loyalty and harder fists. They don't organize toy drives, they organize payback. I told him what happened. I told him I needed men unafraid of noise. He didn't even hesitate. Where and when? The second call was to a number I hadn't dialed in years. A man who makes problems disappear. I didn't know if I'd need him yet, but I wanted the option. But before the cavalry, before the storm, there was one thing left to do. I needed to see Karen Tom, look her in the eye. Let her know the countdown had started, not hers, but mine. Because Fairlawn Ridge wasn't always a battlefield. Once it was home. The kind of neighborhood where kids chased fireflies, where neighbors lent each other sugar, where my grandpa raised me on summers full of charcoal smoke and laughter. And maybe that's why it hurt more. Peace is fragile. One grain of sand at a time, it erodes until the whole beach is gone. And standing there, looking at the cast on my grandfather's arm, I knew she had just taken the last grain. The war for Fairlawn Ridge had begun. Everyone saw the bruises on his face, but no one asked why. That's the thing about fear. It silences a neighborhood faster than any weapon. Fairlawn Ridge had become a kingdom of whispers, and its queen was a woman named Karen Tom. She hadn't always been a tyrant, at least not in public. 5 years ago, she bought the biggest house on the corner of Maple and Elm. She smiled too wide at block parties, brought store-bought pies to potlucks, talked about community standards as if the words were scripture. That's how it starts. Nobody wanted the hassle of running a dormant HOA, so when Karen volunteered, people thought she was doing them a favor. But favors come with interest. The first year it was trash cans left out overnight, rose bushes creeping past the sidewalk, $20 fines that felt like annoyances more than punishments. But she was testing the water, pushing to see how far the current would let her drift. And when no one pushed back, she swam deeper. By year 2, the color beige became law. Basketball hoops vanished from driveways. Vegetable gardens ripped out of the soil like they were weeds. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. Karen was sanding down the individuality of the neighborhood until everything was sterile, until everyone was hers. Some resisted. They got letters from expensive law firms, threats dressed up in legalese. Most couldn't afford to fight. People on fixed incomes bent under the pressure. My grandpa didn't. He stood like a rock, stubborn as ever. "This is my home, Cal," he once told me. "I'm not leaving it for anyone." I respected that. I thought his fight was noble. But noble men get outmatched when the enemy doesn't play by rules. By year 4, Karen wasn't just a president. She was a ruler. HOA meetings turned into theater, her at the folding table, flanked by stone-faced guards who looked more like prison wardens than neighbors. She'd bang her gavel, declare new fees, and dismiss objections with a smirk. The board, her hand-picked loyalists. The HOA became less about community and more about Karen's kingdom. But kingdoms need money, and hers was built on lies. 6 months ago, rumors started. Big tech was coming. A company needed land, clean and cheap. And Fairlawn Ridge, with its easy freeway access, was the perfect prize. Karen wasn't just a tyrant. She was an inside woman. Her job? Make life so unbearable that residents would beg to sell. She was the tip of the spear, backed by corporate millions. And it worked. House by house, family by family, she wore them down. Only the old guard, men like my grandpa, still held on. Too proud to sell. Too stubborn to give up. They were the last defense between a corporation and its prize. That's when intimidation turned to violence. Breaking his arm wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic, a warning for the others. Sign the papers or this will be you. But here's the thing Karen didn't count on. She didn't just attack a stubborn old man. She woke up every part of me I thought I'd buried. The soldier, the fighter, the man who finishes wars. So when the low rumble of Harley engines rolled down Grandpa's Street that afternoon, it wasn't noise. It was a storm announcing itself. 12 iron sentinels, leather and steel glinting in the sun, parked in a line that rattled the windows. My cousins, my family, my army. Razor led them, a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it had its own zip code. Beside him, Bear, the quiet giant whose hands looked more suited for crushing coconuts than shaking hands. Twitch, wiry and twitching, always fiddling with wires or knives, eyes darting like a hawk's. And behind them, 10 more men who looked like trouble carved into flesh. They weren't there for show. They were there because blood had been spilled, our blood. Razor hugged me hard enough to rattle my ribs. "Heard you had some trouble with the neighborhood watch," he rumbled. "Something like that," I muttered. "They broke Art's arm." The humor drained from his face, his eyes turning to ice. "Who?" "HOA president, Karen Tom. She's got hired muscle." Bear cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking branches. "Not professional enough." And just like that, it was war council on the front lawn. That's when Fred showed up. Nervous Fred, the man 2 doors down, always in khaki shorts, always sweating like the world was ending. He shuffled over, eyes darting, whisper shouting, "Cal, is it true about your grandpa?" "It's true." He pointed at the wall of leather and steel behind me. "And these men. Their family." Fred wrung his hands. Oh dear, Cal, you don't know what you're up against. She has drones." That got my attention. Drones. He nodded frantically. Little buzzing things with cameras. Saw one outside my bathroom window last week. Terrifying. And the cars. Black SUVs, tinted windows, circling at night. They follow people. My wife swears one tailed her from the grocery store. Razor raised an eyebrow. This wasn't just an HOA with muscle. This was surveillance, security detail, professional intimidation. Karen wasn't an amateur. I looked at Fred, panicked but brave enough to warn me. "Don't worry," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "We'll handle it." Turning to my crew, my voice went low. "All right, new plan. Twitch, find the drones. I want to see what they see. Bear, take 2 boys, roll the neighborhood slow, find those SUVs, get plates, faces, don't engage, just be seen. Razor, you're with me. We need eyes on Karen. Her house, her routine, her weak points." Fred blinked at me, terrified. "What are you going to do?" I gave him a smile that wasn't kind. "We're going to cut the head off the snake." Night fell, and with it came the buzzing. Fred hadn't exaggerated. The drones lifted silently from Karen's allies' rooftops, blinking red like watchful eyes. Her spies, her invisible chains. Twitch was in Grandpa's attic, laptop glowing in the dark. He grinned like a kid on Christmas. "Consumer-grade phantoms, good cameras, terrible security, give me an hour." His fingers blurred across the keyboard. "We'll own the sky." Meanwhile, Bear's recon paid off. 2 SUVs, predictable routes, same faces. Ex-military mercs, not street thugs, professionals, but predictable is weakness. Predictable can be exploited. And as I stood in the shadows of my grandpa's battered home, listening to the hum of Karen's drones and the rumble of my cousins, Harley's cooling in the driveway, I realized something. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she had fear on her side. But fear only works until someone's willing to bite back. And we weren't just going to bite. We were going to tear her entire machine apart. Everyone in Fairlawn Ridge had learned the same lesson. Keep your head down, don't make noise, and maybe Karen Tom wouldn't notice you. But I wasn't built for silence, and neither were the Iron Sentinels. That night, the neighborhood buzzed with her drones. Mechanical gargoyles perched on rooftops, watching, recording, reminding everyone that privacy was a luxury long gone. But Twitch sat hunched over his laptop like a surgeon, wires sprouting everywhere, his screen full of numbers and code. "Almost in," he muttered, grinning like a mad scientist. Meanwhile, Bear's reconnaissance was clear. 2 black SUVs circling like sharks, 4 mercs in each. Ex-military, predictable patterns, that was their mistake. Predictability is a weakness. Predictability gets you caught. So we set the trap. There's a narrow alley cutting between elm and oak, half hidden behind overgrown bushes and a sagging wooden fence. It was part of their patrol route, a choke point they drove once an hour. Too tight for speed, too dark for awareness, perfect for a lesson. We rolled a dumpster just enough into the lane to force the SUV to crawl. Then we vanished into the shadows. Bear and 2 others crouched behind the fence. I took the lilac bush, thick enough to hide a man with violence on his mind. Razor flexed his hands, his eyes gleaming under the street lamp. None of us carried guns, not tonight. This wasn't about bullets. This was about sending a message. We waited. Minutes felt like hours. The night smelled of damp leaves and oil. Every creak of wood, every rustle of grass stretched the tension tighter. Then finally, headlights, a slow growl of an engine. The SUV turned into the alley, its beam cutting through the dark. The driver slowed, confused by the dumpster, exactly what we wanted. I gave the signal, a low whistle sharp as a bird call. And then the darkness exploded. I burst from the bush, pipe in hand, and smashed it through the driver's window. Glass shattered like ice, raining over him. Before he could even shout, I shoved my flashlight into his face, 10,000 lumens of pure blindness. He screamed, hands clawing at the light. At the same instant, Razor and Bear vaulted the fence like predators. Bear wrenched open the rear door and yanked a merc out as if he weighed nothing. The man hit the pavement with a grunt, his pistol halfway drawn before Razor's elbow shattered his arm at the joint. The weapon clattered uselessly on the asphalt. The other 2 scrambled, hands flying to their guns, but it was too late. High beams of flashlight seared into their eyes. Knuckles slammed into ribs. Pipes kissed skulls. In less than 10 seconds, they were on the ground, coughing, groaning, stripped of their weapons. We zip-tied 3 of them, hoods over their heads, lined neatly against the fence like trash left for collection. They were mercs, but tonight they looked like lost boys who had picked the wrong neighborhood. The 4th, though, the one riding shotgun, he was different. Snake tattoo curling up his neck, haircut sharp as military regulation. He carried himself like he was in charge, and I wanted answers. We dragged him to the SUV. He spat curses through bloodied lips. "Who the hell are you?" I leaned close, voice low, calm. "I'm the man whose grandpa you put in the hospital." His jaw clenched, tough facade, but his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't ready for people who hit back. We threw a hood over his head and loaded him into the back of Bear's pickup. The others, we left them hogtied by the fence. Minutes later, county deputies, redirected by Fred's frantic 911 call about suspicious men, swooped in and scooped them up. They thought they were cleaning the streets. They had no idea we'd set the table for them. Back at Grandpa's garage, we pulled the hood from Snake Tattoo. Under the bare bulb, he looked smaller, still dangerous but exposed. I circled him like a wolf testing prey. "You're going to tell me everything," I said. "Karen, Tom, your orders, your numbers, or I'll make sure you regret every second you spent in this neighborhood." He spat blood onto the concrete. "Go to hell." I almost smiled. Wrong answer. That's when Twitch stormed in, laptop glowing, grin wide. "Boss," he said, spinning the screen around, "we're in full control of her drones." The screen lit up with a live feed. Night vision. A bird's eye view of Fairlawn Ridge. And there, under a lonely street lamp in a park, was Karen Tom, talking to a man in a suit. My stomach dropped. I knew that face. I hadn't seen it in 10 years, not since Kandahar. Marcus Thorne, a ghost, a traitor, a man who sold out his own team for a payday. I thought he was dead. But here he was, standing beside Karen, whispering like the devil at her shoulder. The garage went silent except for the drone's hum. Snake Tattoo shifted uncomfortably. His tough facade cracked just a little at the mention of Thorne's name. He knew who he worked for. He knew the kind of man he was following. I crouched, locking eyes with him. "So it's Thorne, that's who you're breaking arms for, that's who's paying you." For the first time, he didn't spit back. His silence was the answer I needed. Twitch tapped the keyboard, boosting the feed's audio. Karen's voice whined through the speakers, sharp with fear. "It's getting out of control, Marcus. The old fools won't sell. And now there's a biker gang in town. They ambushed my patrol tonight." Thorne's reply cut through the garage like a knife. Smooth, confident, poisonous. "Relax, Karen, they're amateurs, minor setback. Your job is to keep the pressure on. My job is to handle the rough stuff. The deadline stands, 72 hours. But then came the words that made my blood run cold. Thorne handed her a duffel bag. "This should handle the final holdouts. My team will place it tonight. By morning, the fire department will be declaring half the block unsafe. A tragic gas leak. A mandatory evacuation. And you, my dear, will be there with your clipboard, ready to scoop up properties for pennies." A gas leak. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles cracked. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was about fire, about lives, about my grandpa's street being turned into a crater. And in that moment, revenge became something else. It became survival. Everyone thought it was just an HOA dispute. A few fines, some angry neighbors, maybe a lawsuit. Nobody imagined it would end with explosives under their homes. But Marcus Thorne wasn't here to play HOA games. He was here to burn Fairlawn Ridge to the ground. When I heard the word gas leak, it hit like a gut punch. My grandpa's broken arm wasn't the point anymore. This wasn't revenge. This was prevention. Dozens of families asleep in their beds, children, grandparents, newborn bobbies, were about to become collateral damage in Thorne's business plan. I turned to the mercenary tied to the chair. His name was Miller. His jaw was clenched, but fear was leaking through his eyes. "Where?" I demanded. "Where are they rigging the line?" For a moment, loyalty held. But when Twitch replayed Thorne's voice, smooth, calculating, promising a fire disguised as an accident, I saw Miller's resolve crack. His lips parted. "Chestnut Street," he muttered. "End of the cul-de-sac, main valve, weak infrastructure, easy target." My blood turned to ice. My grandpa's house was 2 doors from that valve, and the Hendersons, Fred's neighbors, had just brought home a newborn. "This won't be a big fireball," Miller stammered, his pride stripped away. "Small-shaped charge ruptures the joint. Gas sinks into the crawl spaces, the basements. By morning, the whole block's filled with fumes. All it takes is a spark, a truck engine, a light switch. Then," he stopped. He didn't need to finish. Fred, who'd been hovering in the doorway, went pale. "Chestnut Street?" His voice cracked. That's where the Hendersons live, with the baby." The abstract threat became flesh and blood. A baby's cry, a family's life. Suddenly, this wasn't about land or pride. It was about innocence caught in the crossfire of greed. I looked at Razor. He didn't need words. He just nodded. We all knew what came next. "How many men?" I pressed. "2, Miller admitted. "Demo guy and a guard. They're moving at 2 a.m. low visibility, minimal traffic." I checked my watch. Midnight, 2 hours. "Okay," I said, voice low, calm, the way it always went before things got violent. "Here's the plan. Twitch, you're our eye in the sky. Keep the drones patched. If a cat sneezes, I want to know. Razor, Bear, you're with me. We intercept the demo crew. Clean, fast, silent. The rest of you form perimeter. No one in, no one out. Fred." His head jerked up like a deer caught in headlights. "I need you to make a call. At 1:55, dial 911. Report a prowler in your backyard. Sound panicked, terrified. That'll draw the local patrols away from Chestnut, keep them chasing shadows while we move. Can you do that?" Fred's hands shook, knuckles white. "Me, I ka." I stepped closer, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you can. For the Hendersons, for that baby." Something shifted in him. Fear hardened into resolve. He swallowed hard and nodded. "A prowler, backyard, 1:55, I can do that." By 1:30, we were shadows. The sentinels fanned out, melting into hedges, crouching behind fences, settling into silence like wolves circling a pen. The cul-de-sac was a bowl, one way in, one way out, a perfect trap. I crouched behind a massive oak with Razor and Bear, eyes fixed on the green utility plate at the cul-de-sac's center. Twitch's voice buzzed in my earpiece, quiet but urgent. "Eyes on target vehicle, white panel van, 2 inside, turning onto Chestnut, 500 yards out." My pulse slowed, not faster, slower, calm, cold, the way it always did when violence was seconds away. The van rolled up, headlights off, engine clicking to silence. 2 men stepped out. One big, carrying a shotgun, the other smaller, hauling a heavy tool bag, the demo man. "There at the plate," Twitch whispered, "bags open." I watched him kneel, flashlight beam flickering as he pulled out a block of C4, wires dangling like snakes. I clicked my tongue, the signal. We moved, not rushing, flowing, predators from 3 angles. Bear's massive hand clamped onto the guard's shoulder before he even registered danger. The shotgun started to swing, but Razor was faster. 2 sharp strikes, one to the elbow, one to the neck. The man crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The demo man looked up, eyes wide, C4 block still in his hand. I was already there. My boot slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling. The explosive tumbled onto the grass. I planted my foot on his throat, not enough to crush, just enough to silence. "Don't move," I growled. We zip-tied them, dragged them into the shadows. By then, Twitch's voice hissed in my ear again. "Police at Fred." Distraction worked. "You're clear." I bent down, picked up the C4, felt its weight. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was murder wrapped in plastic. Inside the van, we found blueprints of the neighborhood's gas lines, more explosives, and under the seat, something worse, a manila envelope. Payment records, wire transfers, fraudulent property agreements. Karen Tom's name was all over it. Money trails leading straight to her private accounts. Proof she'd been selling her neighbors out. But then my hand froze. There it was, a signature, authorizing a $50,000 payment from the developer's shell company to Karen. A name I knew better than my own. Arthur Jensen. My grandpa. The world tilted, my breath caught. It wasn't possible. The signature was his, steady, familiar. The same hand that signed my birthday cards, my school permission slips. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The victim, the stubborn old soldier who refused to sell, the man who raised me, his name was on their payroll. Razor saw my face pale. "Cal, what is it?" I handed him the ledger. My voice was hollow. "It's my grandpa." Bear frowned, shook his head. "Doesn't make sense." No, it didn't. None of it did. Betrayal clawed at my chest. Was he a traitor, or was this a game deeper than I could see? I shoved it down. There was no time. We had less than 24 hours until Karen's final HOA meeting, the place where she planned to tie it all up with neat little signatures. I couldn't think about betrayal now, not yet. Because Karen and Marcus Thorne thought they were playing their final card, but they didn't know I was holding the entire deck. Everyone thought the enemy was out there, behind tinted SUV windows, buzzing in the night sky on drone wings. But when I saw my grandpa's signature on that payment ledger, the enemy felt a whole lot closer. Arthur Jensen, my blood, my anchor, the man whose broken arm had lit this fire inside me. His name was scrawled in black ink at the bottom of a transfer sheet, authorizing $50,000 straight into Karen Tom's greedy hands. It didn't make sense. My head screamed it was fake, a forgery, a trick, but my heart knew the loops of his handwriting. The way the J always dipped lower than it should. The steady slant of the letters, strong even in his old age, it was his. And for a second, the ground slipped out from under me. Was he a victim, or was he playing me like everyone else? Razor's eyes bored into me. "Cal, talk to me. What the hell is this?" I clenched my jaw. "It's his signature, my grandpa." Bear shook his head, confused. "Doesn't add up. Old man," been the loudest voice against Karen. "Why would he be taking money from her?" That was the question eating me alive. Was he part of it? Had his broken arm been punishment for cold feet instead of defiance? Was I fighting a war for a man who'd already sold the battlefield? I couldn't answer, not yet, not when there was still work to do. I shoved the papers into my jacket. "We finish the mission first, then I'll find out the truth." The Sentinels didn't push. They knew better. In war, hesitation kills, and tonight we were still at war. Twitch was in the corner of the garage, hunched over the captured laptop, fingers flying across keys. "Boss," he muttered, eyes glued to the screen. "I cracked it. Thorne's entire playbook is here, financials, contracts, even a draft press release about the tragic gas line explosion." I stepped closer. "You can broadcast it." "Oh, I can do better than broadcast it. I can hijack the HOA's feed, the clubhouse projector, the local cable channel. Hell, I can push it to every phone in Fairlawn Ridge. When Karen calls her meeting tomorrow, she'll be center stage on her own trial." Razor's grin spread wide. I liked the sound of that. But me, I couldn't shake the weight in my gut. Because if Twitch blasted everything, Grandpa's name would be there too. Not just Karen's, not just Thorne, Arthur Jensen. A signature that would stain him forever in front of his neighbors. Justice for the community, or loyalty to blood, which mattered more. I didn't know. The hours bled away in the garage. Plans were drawn, gear checked, roles assigned. The Sentinels had turned into a strike team, every man ready to lay it all down for a neighborhood that wasn't even theirs. That's the thing about loyalty, it doesn't stop at borders. It follows blood, it follows family. By dawn, the first hints of a new day broke over Fairlawn Ridge. The SUVs were gone, the drones grounded, dead under Twitch's control. But Karen's shadow still hung heavy. Everyone knew the meeting at 7:00 p.m. wasn't optional. It was her stage for victory. Except now, it was going to be ours. As the day crawled on, the residents shuffled nervously, pretending to go about normal lives, but I saw it in their eyes, defeat. They'd been pushed so far, fined into poverty, intimidated into silence. Tomorrow, they'd be homeless. Tonight, they thought they'd sign away what little dignity they had left. And part of me wanted to tell them the truth, that salvation was coming, that Karen and Thorne were about to be exposed. But I didn't, because promises are fragile, and the only thing worse than despair is false hope. So I kept quiet, let the storm brew. When the sun dipped low, the sentinels gathered in Grandpa's backyard. The air smelled of oil, leather, and quiet determination. Razor pulled a cigar from his jacket but didn't light it, just chewed on the end, eyes fixed on me. "What's the play, Cal?" I took a long breath. "We go in silent, let Karen talk, let her think she's already won, and when the time is right," I tapped my jacket where the hard drive and papers sat heavy. "We show the world who she really is, who Thorn is." "And the old man?" Razor asked carefully. I hesitated. "We don't drag him into this, not yet. He gets his say after." Bear crossed his arms. "If he's dirty, better we know now than later." His words cut deep, but I shook my head. One fight at a time. And maybe it was selfish. Maybe it was blind loyalty. But I couldn't let the world condemn my grandpa without hearing his voice first. By 6 o'clock, the neighborhood clubhouse was lit up, a sterile beige box that smelled of cheap coffee and fear. Residents filed in, faces pale, eyes down. They took their seats in plastic chairs, clutching mandatory summons letters like death warrants. And in the front row, sitting stiff, arm still in its sling, was my grandpa. He didn't look at me when I walked in. His face was stone, his eyes unreadable. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but I didn't, not yet. Because at 7 sharp the door opened, and Karen Tom walked in. She wore power like armor, a tailored suit that gleamed under fluorescent lights. At her side, 2 new bodyguards, bigger and meaner than the last set, and behind them Marcus Thorn himself, smirking like a snake in human skin. The crowd went silent. The predators had entered the room. Karen strode to the folding table at the front, her throne of plastic and plywood, papers stacked high in front of her. "Welcome," she purred. "I know these have been difficult days, but OmniCorp has graciously expedited their offer to purchase our properties. Sign tonight and you'll be compensated fairly. You can move on to safer homes." Her voice dripped with poison disguised as honey, the arsonist pretending to be the firefighter. And I felt my hand tighten into a fist, because she thought this was her victory lap. But she had no idea her victory parade was about to turn into a trial. Everyone in that room thought the HOA meeting would be the end, the final humiliation, a mandatory summons where the last stubborn neighbors would bow their heads, sign away their homes, and accept defeat. But defeat is only permanent when nobody fights back. I stood near the back in my usual jeans and leather jacket, head down, blending in with the frightened crowd. My cousins were ghosts in the parking lot, waiting for my signal. Twitch sat a block away in a stolen van, fingers dancing across a keyboard. The projector behind Karen was primed, the cables already hijacked. All I had to do was say one word into the mic at my collar. Karen shuffled her papers, plastering on a sympathetic smile. "This is an opportunity," she said smoothly, her voice rehearsed. "OmniCorp has gone above and beyond to ensure you are compensated fairly. In light of our recent safety issues, it's clear this neighborhood is no longer suitable for families. But you will not be left behind. Tonight, with Mr. Thorne's generous assistance, we finalize the transition." Her words slid over the crowd like oil on water. Some heads nodded, beaten into submission. Others stared at the floor, too tired to resist. My grandpa sat in the front row, arm in a sling, face unreadable. But Thorne, he wasn't unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, watching Karen play puppet master. He thought the show was his. That's when I whispered into my mic, "Showtime." The screen behind Karen flickered. For a moment, the room buzzed with confusion. Then the slideshow of OmniCorp's glass towers vanished, replaced by a grainy but unmistakable drone feed. Gasps echoed. On the screen, under the pale light of a street lamp, Karen Tom and Marcus Thorne appeared. The video zoomed in, crystal clear, Twitch's handiwork flawless. And then came the audio. "My team will take care of the placement tonight," Thorne's voice boomed through the speakers. "By morning, the fire department will be declaring half the block unsafe for habitation. A tragic gas leak." The room erupted. Shouts of disbelief, horror, rage. Residents turned on each other, demanding answers. Karen's face drained of color. Thorne shot to his feet, snarling at the guards. "Shut it off now." But before they could move, the clubhouse doors slammed open. Razor Bear and 10 iron sentinels strode in, boots heavy leather vests gleaming under fluorescent light. They formed a wall across the exits, no guns, no weapons visible, just presence. Raw, immovable presence. The guards froze, instincts screaming that this wasn't a fight they could win. I stepped forward, my voice calm but carrying. "Sit down, Marcus. The presentation's just getting started." The screen shifted again. Now it showed the payment ledger. Wire transfers from Omnicorp's shell companies. Bribes paid to Karen Tom. "This," I said, voice hard, "is how your president has been funding her diamonds and SUVs, by selling you out. Every fine, every rule, every broken arm was just part of her game, and she played you all for profit." Cries of "liar" and "traitor" filled the room. Residents surged to their feet, faces red with fury. Karen stammered, sweat breaking through her perfect makeup. "This is fabricated. Lies, don't believe." But the screen changed again. Now it showed Miller, the captured mercenary, his bruised face staring into the camera. His confession played loud and clear. He named Thorne. He explained the gas line plot. He admitted everything. The crowd went silent, shock swallowing their rage. For the first time, Thorne's smirk faltered. He reached into his jacket and pulled a pistol. "You're all dead," he snarled, leveling it at me. Gasp, screams, chairs scraping as people ducked. But before he could fire, a voice cut through the chaos. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus." Every head turned. It was my grandpa. He stood sling tight against his chest, his good hand holding up a small, battered tape recorder. His voice carried steady, defiant. Because while Cal was gathering evidence, I was gathering mine. He pressed play. Thorne's voice filled the room. "Just take the money, old man. You helped get the ball rolling with Karen. Sign the final papers and walk away. Nobody has to know you were my first point of contact." Then Grandpa's voice, raw with fury. "The deal was to get rid of Karen, you son of a, not to destroy the neighborhood. I'm out." And then the sound of a struggle, a sickening crack, my grandpa crying out in pain. The entire room froze. The ledger, the signature, the money, it wasn't betrayal, it was bait. My grandpa had been playing a deeper game all along, pretending to cooperate, signing documents to get close enough to catch the real snake. And Thorne, arrogant as ever, had given him exactly what he needed. My chest tightened with relief, guilt, pride. He hadn't sold us out. He'd sacrificed himself to draw the fire. Karen crumpled into her chair, face ashen, hands shaking. Thorne's pistol wavered, his eyes darting, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And then the doors slammed open again. But this time it wasn't bikers. It was state troopers, half a dozen in tactical gear, rifles raised. "Nobody move," their sergeant barked. For one breathless second, it was a standoff. Troopers, Thorne, the sentinels, the terrified crowd. The screen behind me still playing Thorne's words like a noose tightening around his neck. The sergeant's eyes swept the scene, cold and professional. They locked on Thorne's gun. "Drop it now." Thorne's jaw clenched, sweat dripped down his temple. For a moment I thought he'd fire, thought we'd all go down in a hail of bullets. But then he saw it. The troopers' steady aim, the sentinels' wall of leather and steel, the crowd's eyes burning with hatred. His shoulders sagged. He let the pistol clatter to the floor. 2 troopers swarmed him, slamming him face first onto the table, cuffing his hands behind his back. Karen screamed, lunged for the papers, but another pair of troopers caught her, pinning her to the floor as she wept and cursed. It was over. For the first time in years, Fairlawn Ridge had something it hadn't known in a long time. Hope. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut should have been enough. The sight of Marcus Thorne, once untouchable, now pressed against the table like any common thug, should have brought satisfaction. But the room was dead silent, every resident staring not at him, but at my grandpa. The tape recorder still whirred in his good hand. His chest rose and fell, shallow but steady, his sling holding the broken arm tight against his ribs. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a man who had carried the weight of a secret for too long and finally set it down. Fred was the first to speak, voice trembling. "Arthur, you mean to tell us you worked with them?" Grandpa's eyes flicked to mine. He didn't flinch at the accusation, but I saw the pain there. "I played along," he said simply. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Karen wanted me to sign. Thorne wanted me to play broker, so I did, but not for them, for us, to catch them in their own web." The room buzzed, disbelief rippling through the crowd. "You all think I'm just an old man who fixes fences and tells war stories," he continued, his jaw set. "But I've lived long enough to know you don't beat snakes by screaming at them. You let them coil tighter and tighter until they choke themselves. I signed their papers, I took their calls, I even let them break me if it meant getting this." He lifted the recorder slightly. "Proof." Karen screamed from the floor, her face streaked with mascara. "Lies, he's lying, he was part of it. He's just trying to save himself." A trooper yanked her upright, steel cuffs biting into her wrists, but her shrill voice seemed to embolden the doubts in the room. Mrs. Henderson, clutching her newborn to her chest, whispered, "So, all this time you were pretending." Grandpa's voice softened, eyes glistening. "I was surviving, for you, for my grandson, for this neighborhood. I knew no one would believe a word without proof, and proof comes at a cost." My throat tightened, because I remembered the look in his eyes at the hospital, the weight in his voice when he told me to stand down. He hadn't been asking me to back away out of fear. He'd been trying to protect his plan. Razor muttered under his breath beside me, "Hell of a poker player, your grandpa." But not everyone was convinced. One neighbor, Dale, a man who had lost his job and home under Karen's reign, stepped forward, his face red. "We suffered for months while you played games. You let them bleed us dry, Arthur. You let them fine us, humiliate us, terrorize us, and you could have stopped it sooner." The words cut deep, and I braced for Grandpa to falter. But instead he straightened, his good hand trembling but steady enough to point at Dale. "You think I didn't want to fight sooner? You think I didn't want to grab a shotgun and throw them out myself? But what then? They had lawyers, cops in their pockets, developers with money you can't imagine. If I'd swung first, we'd all be behind bars while they bulldozed our homes." His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with fury. "So yes, I let them think they had me. I let them think I was theirs, and it broke me more than they ever could with their fists. But I waited, because sometimes waiting is the only weapon you have." Silence. And in that silence, the truth settled like dust after a storm. He wasn't perfect. He hadn't been able to save them from every cut and bruise, but he had given them a chance when no one else could. The troopers marched Thorne and Karen out, their protests fatting into the night. The sentinels held the line until the last of the mercenaries were hauled off in the SUVs they once patrolled in. One by one, the neighbors turned back toward my grandpa, their anger slowly bleeding into something else. Respect, gratitude, a fragile kind of forgiveness. As the room cleared, I finally approached him. The crowd gave us space, their whispers a background hum. "You could have told me," I said softly. His eyes, tired but sharp, met mine. "And you would have charged in, guns blazing, just like you did tonight, and I would have lost both the plan and you." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing on my chest. "I thought you betrayed us." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sadness and pride. "Then I played my part well." We stood there, just the two of us in the aftermath of chaos. For the first time in weeks, I felt the storm inside me quiet. But as the neighbors filed out, their shoulders lighter, their steps quicker, one thought lingered in my mind. This wasn't truly over. Developers like OmniCorp didn't vanish overnight. Thorne had allies. Karen had friends in City Hall. The war had been won, yes, but the battle for Fairlawn Ridge's soul was far from finished. And I realized something else, watching my grandpa limp out of the clubhouse under the weight of a dozen grateful handshakes. Sometimes heroes don't look like bikers with leather jackets or soldiers with scars. Sometimes they look like old men with tape recorders, willing to let the world think the worst of them, just long enough to do the right thing. That night, Fairlawn Ridge went to bed with its first taste of freedom in months. The drones were gone. The Mercs were locked up, and the neighbors, once fractured and fearful, had stood together in a single room and seen the truth with their own eyes. But me, I didn't sleep, not yet. Because when you pull weeds from a garden, the roots don't die easy. And I knew Marcus Thorne wasn't the kind of man who stayed in cuffs for long. The night after the meeting, Fairlawn Ridge felt different. Not free, not safe, not healed, but lighter, like a storm had finally broken, leaving the air raw and heavy, but clean. Neighbors who once avoided each other's eyes now lingered on porches, whispering, checking in. Someone brought Mrs. Henderson's soup. Someone else fixed the Martins' broken fence. Small things, fragile things, but in neighborhoods like ours, that's how survival begins, one act of kindness at a time. The Sentinels stayed a few more days, posted on corners, engines rumbling like watchful dogs. Karen's fines were suspended, her bank accounts frozen. The county investigators pulled boxes of documents from her house, every scrap of evidence tying her greed to Thorne's scheme. She was finished, at least here. But Marcus Thorne, that was different. 3 nights later, the news broke. Prisoner transport van overturned on Route 17. 2 troopers injured, 3 suspects escaped. Thorne was gone. The moment I read it, I knew. The storm wasn't finished. It had just moved off the horizon, waiting for the right moment to roll back in. Still, we didn't let it rob us of the small victories. By the weekend, the neighborhood gathered in the clubhouse, not under summons, but by choice. No guards, no fines, no threats. Just families sitting in plastic chairs, trying to remember what community felt like. Fred stood awkwardly at the front, holding a clipboard. Well, guess we need a new board. Anyone want to volunteer? For a moment, silence. Then hands lifted, hesitant but willing. People who'd been voiceless were ready to speak. People who'd been powerless were ready to lead. And my grandpa, still in his sling, raised his hand too. Not for power, for service. Because that's who he was. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the crowd rebuild what Karen had tried to burn. Razor nudged me with his elbow. You gonna raise your hand? I shook my head. Not my place, this is their fight now. He smirked. Funny, you sound just like him. He nodded toward Grandpa. Maybe he was right. Later that night after the meeting, I walked Grandpa home. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you listen harder. He moved slowly, his limp more noticeable in the dim light. I offered my arm, but he waved me off, stubborn as ever. When we reached his porch, he sank into the old rocking chair, sighing as if the weight of years finally caught up with him. You did good, Cal, he said softly. Better than I expected. I chuckled, sitting on the steps. That's one way to say thanks. He smiled faintly. You've got fire in you, always have, but fire burns out fast if it doesn't have patience to feed it. His eyes met mine, sharp despite the exhaustion. You learned patience this time. I wanted to argue, wanted to remind him how close I'd come to losing it all in that alley, in that clubhouse, in every shadowed corner of this fight. But he wasn't wrong. Patience hadn't been my weapon, it had been his. And maybe, for the first time, I understood why it mattered. We sat there a while, listening to the night. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me since the ledger. How did you know Thorne would slip, that the tape would be enough? He leaned back, rocking gently. Because men like him always do. They think they're smarter, stronger, untouchable, but pride blinds them. You don't need to beat them head on. You just need to let them think they've already won. Then you show the world who they really are. I nodded slowly. The lesson settled deep, heavier than any scar I carried. Before I left, he reached out with his good hand, gripping my arm tight. Remember, Cal, revenge feels good for a night, but justice lasts. The words echoed in my head as I rode out with the Sentinels the next morning. We didn't ride far, just far enough to let the neighborhood breathe on its own again. But as the engines roared down the highway, I knew Fairlawn Ridge wasn't just a street of houses anymore. It was a story. A reminder that ordinary people can stand up when power tries to crush them. And Karen Tom, she faded into the system, her name whispered in shame instead of fear. But Marcus Thorne, he was still out there. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind rattles the windows, I wonder if he's planning his return. Wonder if he lies awake cursing the old man who outplayed him, the grandson who stood in his way. But I don't fear it. Because Fairlawn Ridge isn't afraid anymore, because my grandpa taught me patience, because the sentinels ride when called. And because in the end, men like Thorne always choke on their own pride. That's karma, that's the story. And this time, the neighborhood got to write the ending. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.